everyone, welcome to the first hands-on week for cybersecurity with AWS Bootcamp. In this first tutorial, we will create AWS RDS and secure our database. So let's navigate to our AWS homepage and let's search RDS on our search bar. And as you can see, this is the console for Amazon RDS, and you can see the database instances that are currently running. So there are no current instances running. Now let's get to create a database. So click on create database. Now here you can select standard or easy create modes to choose and create. So for the engine type, we are going to select PostgreSQL, and we're going to make sure to choose free tier and use a master name and master password for your database. After that, scroll down and make sure your database is publicly accessible. Create database. Now here we can see our database is being created. Close this tab. It takes a little bit time. So now after the RDS Postgres database is created, now you can come back to AWS RDS dashboard, and as you can see here, we only have one instance running. Just click on it. So here you can see our database, Postgres database is currently running. So let's just click on its name. And as you can see here inside, we can see under the connectivity and security, you can see endpoint, port, networking and security, and VPC security group. So this is the security group, and in which our database is created. So just let's get into that. So we need to make some changes to this security group to allow connections from any IP address. So for that, let's navigate into the security group. Now as you can see, this is the security group which has the current rules. So we need to edit this. So just click on this. As you can see, you can edit the inbound rules and just simply add a rule, custom TCP. So you can select port 5432, source custom IP, and for the type we're gonna select PostgreSQL. Yep, there you go. So let's just check anywhere. Yep, everything's right. So after this is done, you can delete your previous security group ID rule, and you can give any description if you want as well, and just save the rules. Alright, so after your AWS RDS database is created, now let's get back to Pgadmin. If you don't have a Pgadmin in your website, install Pgadmin. You can go and install Pgadmin for your PC. You can download any of it. I have Windows, so I'm gonna go and select the latest release. You can click the link and download Pgadmin. So for now, I've already downloaded it. Let's just open it. There you go. So yeah, so when you open the Pgadmin, either you can just directly click add new server, or you can go to server, right click on it, click register and go to server. Here you can give a name to your server. I'm gonna give it Postgres, and after that let's change to connection tab. So here in the hostname or address, now you need to get back to your RDS and select your Postgres database, and here you can see and find endpoint and port. Just copy this and paste it in your hostname and address. So as you can see, the port is set to 5432 and maintenance data. Use the username which you use to make your RDS database and put in the password. Now let's go to parameters. Let's click save. So after we have connected our Pgadmin to our Postgres RDS database, now we are gonna try running SQL queries on the database. So after you have created, just get back to the under Postgres, you can see database. So expand that and you can see the Postgres database that we created. Now right click on the database and you can see at the bottom you can see the query tool option. Click that, and yeah, after this now there's a provided sample SQL query in the description. You can copy that, and in the query you can come and paste that query. So now let's try to run this SQL code which will create and populate tables. Let's just see. So now what we will be doing is we're gonna build a Lambda function, simple Lambda function, which is gonna return you hello world. So we're gonna create a Lambda function with the latest release of Python, and let's just get started. So let's go to AWS navigation tab and on search panel search Lambda. Yep, select the first one. Yep, so it's a landing page for AWS Lambda. So as you can see, it shows different examples in Node.js, Java, Python, and we're gonna have to start creating a simple hello function. So this is the Lambda function which we're gonna execute. So let's start create function. Now you're gonna give it a name. Let's give it a name bootcamp function. And for the runtime, we're gonna select Python 3.12. So you might see in description you have Python 3.9 or 8. Just you choose 3.12 for this tutorial. Now after that, click continue. So I forgot to mention this thing. To create a function, you need to choose one of these options: author from scratch, a blueprint, or a container image. For now we're just gonna select author from scratch. Click create function. Now after the function is created, AWS will direct you to a configuration page of your function. So in the code source we can see an integrated code editor from AWS, and it's from default it provides a Lambda handler function named Lambda handler. This function is a basic example which just prints hello world from Lambda. Now what we're going to do is we're going to replace and modify the default code. So there's a sample code provided in the description as well. You can copy that and simply paste it here. So yeah, after changing the codes, you can click deploy to save your codes. So click deploy. After this, the changes have been saved. Now our next step is to test the Lambda function, whether it's working or not. So let's navigate to the test tab. See here, there's a test tab on top of the functions configuration page. So now here we need to create a new test event. So we need to name an event name. Let's give a meaningful name to this. Let's write event test. You can give whatever name you want. So in the event JSON section with the test selected, default template can remain as in, or you can just input custom JSON data that matches your function's expected inputs. Now after that, click changes to save your test events. So with this test event selected, Now you can select the test event.test. This will execute your Lambda function using the test event data. So after the execution, the results will be displayed in the console, and if everything is configured correctly, you should see execution log from saying hello from bootcamp function. Let's just test it now. So yeah, here you can see in the body, hello from bootcamp function. Now after we have successfully tested our Lambda function, now what we're going to do is we're going to create an API using API gateway. So for that, let's add an API gateway trigger for the bootcamp function using a get method. So now first step is to open Lambda function. So you can go back to Lambda. You can see our current Lambda function that's running. You can select on the function tab on your left hand side, click function, and you can get into the bootcamp function by clicking its name. So yeah, we're inside. Now in the function overview, you can see an add trigger button. So just click add trigger. Now after the add trigger button, you can see trigger configuration. Now we need to select a source. So for that, we're going to select API gateway, the second option here. You can choose different trigger configuration for your requirements in your functions. So for now, let's select API gateway. So after that, now we have two options for the API types. First is HTTP or REST API. For a standard approach, select REST API, and now for API, we're gonna select create a new API. So click create a new API, and for the REST API type, and select REST API. And for security, we're going to choose open for testing purposes. So this option allows unauthenticated access to your API for production environments. Consider using other security options like AWS IAM permissions or Lambda authorizers for better security. Now let's click add. So after adding the API gateway, now we'll configure and deploy API gateway. So as you can see in the screen here, you can see API gateway console link. So if you click the link, we're gonna land in API gateway console. So yeah, as you can see under the resources tab, as you can see for the bootcamp function, there's only an any method. So we need to select the resource and get under create method, so we can create a get method. So create method. Now you can select method types, get, and for the integration type, make sure you select the Lambda function, so it's set up to trigger your Lambda function. And after selecting the Lambda function, get down to select your bootcamp function. Now we're gonna leave the everything as it is for default and select create method. Okay, so get method is successfully created. Now after the get method is set, now with the get method configured, we must deploy the API to make it accessible. So as you can see on the right hand side, there's a deploy button. So click on deploy API. So you'll be asked to select or create a new deployment stage. You can use the default settings or create a new stage. You can just set default, and you can give it a description. Get method deploy. Click deploy. So after we deploy the API gateway, let's come back to bootcamp function Lambda homepage, and we can see here two API gateway. We have two endpoints. One was like any method and another one is get method. So if you click any of the endpoints, for example, let's just click the first one for any method, you can see the output hello from bootcamp function, so it's working. Let's click the second one. Yep, so it's also the same, hello from the bootcamp function. This means our API is working. Now in the next step, we're going to create an API that connects to the database. So we don't need this bootcamp function anymore, so make sure you don't forget to delete this function and all its components as well. Just delete it. So now let's create a layer to AWS Lambda. So for this, you're gonna get to navigate to AWS Lambda console page and go to Lambda's layers on your left navigation bar. So click on layers. Now click create layer button. So for the name, you can follow the description and put in psycorp to layer. Now after that, you need to download the psycorp zip file from the link in the description. So make sure you upload the zip file. So here it is, upload. And compatible runtime. So for the runtime, I'm gonna select Python 3.12. And you can provide a description for your layer as well. In this bar, now let's select create. So the Lambda layer is ready. Now let's get back to Lambda function. So here, let's add the layer we created into the function. Now add a layer. AWS, we can add custom layer and choose the psycorp layer which we created. Now click add. So now we have successfully added the layer to our Lambda function. Now the next step, what we're going to do is we're going to go and modify the Lambda function to connect to the database. So as you can see, there's a basic format of the Lambda function. Now what you can do is you can go back and copy the Lambda function from the description and paste it in the Lambda function. So as you can see, this is the Lambda function. So there are some changes which you need to do in the Lambda function code. So as you can see here in the get database function, so you need to modify this with your own database name, your username, your own password, and your endpoint of your database from AWS. So after you replace it, we can go ahead and test it. So I'm gonna just replace it now. So after changing the description, you might have a question like, what is the host link? So it's the first RDS database that we created at the first of this tutorial. Just copy the endpoint link, that's the same one there. So after this, now we're gonna deploy these changes. So if you do not deploy it, it's not gonna work. So you need to deploy and save your changes. So after deploying, we're gonna test the function. So it's successfully deployed. Now let's go and test it. Let me just show you something else. So I had already previously created a test event. What you need to do is after you click it, you're gonna land in this create new test event. So give it a name, test, and you can leave everything as it is and click save. And now test. Yeah, so as you can see, we're getting the return. So that's working. Now let's get into another step. Now let's get back to Lambda functions, and now we have to add API gateway trigger. Let's click source, API gateway, create new API, REST API. Just similarly like what we did last time, it's all the same steps now. Don't need to do anything over there. Now let's get into API gateway. So yeah, let's add a get method lambda function, and you need to enable this lambda proxy integration. And let's select our lambda function, demo function, create method. So yeah, our get method is successfully created. Now let's get back to API gateway. You can get back to your lambda function and refresh the page as well. So after we set up the get method in our API gateway, we get API endpoint links for our get method and any method. Let's just open up this get method in a new link. So as you can see, we're getting the return of the data of the first SQL query that we run in our database, as you can see here. So this shows that the API is working. Now let's get back to our console. Now we have successfully made an API that connects to the database. Now let's go ahead and test our code in our local machine. So we're gonna need to install Visual Studio Code. If you don't have it, just go to your browser and type install Visual Studio. So click the first link. So yeah, you can get here and download for Windows, Apple or Mac. Click the link and it's gonna start downloading automatically. So now after you have installed Visual Studio Code, get back to the Visual Studio Code, and now we're gonna create a Lambda function to connect to the database, the same function code which we used for the Lambda function earlier. Now we're gonna test it in our local machine. So for that, let's create a folder called AWS function. Let's go to file, open folder, and you can just right click here, folder, let's give it a name, AWS function. Now you can select this folder. So just trust the author. Now we're inside AWS function folder. Now we're going to create a subfolder called DB demo function. So inside this subfolder, let's go ahead and create a new file called Lambda function with Python. So in this file, we're going to go and paste the function code in the description. So here as well, you need to replace your database name, user and password with your Postgres database credentials and your host endpoint. So let's go ahead and do that. So now to test the function on our local machine, now we're in AWS function.py directory. Now let's change our directory to DB demo function. So let's put as cd. So now inside DB demo function, now we need to install necessary dependencies like Psycorp library. So let's go ahead and install it. Now it's downloading. Now let's run the Python code. Make sure you're putting in the name of the file right, because you're gonna get an error else. Let's say. So yeah, it's working. So even if you might have some errors, so if you have successfully run the commands, you're gonna see all the records in the database as well. So yeah, that's it for testing the code on your local machine. So now after testing your code on local machine, now we're going to use Visual Studio Code to deploy the Lambda function on AWS. So for this you need to connect your IAM credentials to AWS Toolkit for Visual Studio Code. So after installing the AWS extension on Visual Studio, this is what your landing page looks like. When you open, for instance, I go to the file and our function. So on your left side, go to AWS extension. So it's already open here. So before you connect to AWS with IAM credential, you have three options, but choose the second one. Go to Resource Explorer and use for this use single sign-in and provide IAM credentials to sign in. Choose Resource Explorer and provide IAM roles to sign in. You need to provide your secret key, and after you connect, on your left hand side you can see under the Explorer, navigate to, you can see all the services from AWS that are running. So under the Lambda function, select DB demo function, which we created last time. So right click on it and click on invoke on AWS. So after clicking right invoke on DB demo function, on your top right hand side click invoke, and so if everything works, we'll get a response with JSON body from the database. So as you can see, here's the JSON body from the database. So we have successfully deployed the Lambda function from Visual Studio Code.